Hi, this is Thunder Levin, and you're listening to the FSF PopCast.
The show where we argue whether it's data or data, but hey, we got the name of his brother Lore correct on the first try.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 133. He'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and joins Finn and his chainsaw into the depths of the Great White Shark, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back, and what's left of his ex-wife's hand.
All right, guys, our guest today is an American screenwriter. He's a director, most famous, and you probably know him for his first four Sharknado films that he was the writer for. But he's also responsible for movies like Mute, Vampire Zombies from the Hood, Megalodon, Atlantic Rim, Apocalypse Earth, and so many others. We are thrilled to welcome Thunder Levin to the FSF PopCast. Welcome to the show, Thunder.
Hello, everybody.
Ew. This is going to be a fun
Hello.
conversation, I just know it.
Yeah, it will be. We're going to have fun. All right, so Thunder, according to your IMDb bio, and we always preface this when we mention anything from IMDb, it can be inaccurate from time to time. But in the bio, it said that you credited Star Trek and Star Wars with increasing your interest in science fiction and filmmaking. So what I'm curious is, could you tell us how each of those distinct universes had an impact on your future work in the entertainment industry?
Yes. Star Trek was my favorite show when I was a very little kid. The original Kirk and Spock. And God, I don't know how old I was, maybe 5 or 6. It was the one show my mom let me stay up late to watch. And this wasn't even, I don't think, when it was on network TV. I think it was already in syndication when I started to watch it. And I wanted to grow up to be Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock, probably Mr. Spock, and work on the Enterprise. That was what I wanted to do when I grew up. But I understood, sadly, that, it wasn't real. Because in fact, around the same time, I was watching the Apollo moon missions. Apollo 11 is just about the first memory I have. Okay. And that was so primitive. I didn't want anything to do with that. If that was space travel, I wasn't interested. And the idea of having to join the military to do it also didn't appeal to me. At least not when I was 6.
Fair enough.
And so I was a big fan, and we had a distant relation, a cousin who we still can't quite figure out how we're all related, but he was a cameraman in movies and TV, and this is my, he's my parents' generation, but he got me a book called The Making of Star Trek. Which by Gene Roddenberry and Stephen Whitfield. Cool. And it was a very dry, grown-up book. It was not suitable for a 6-year-old, but so naturally I turned to the photo section, and one of the photos in that book is a bunch of these 1960s studio technicians working on the bridge of the Enterprise. And it suddenly occurred to me, in my little 6-year-old head, that there was a way I could work on the Enterprise. And so that was where the seed was planted. And then, you grow up and there are a lot of different things going on. And of course I wanted to be a baseball player. And I think for a while I wanted to be the guy who drove the back of the hook and ladder fire engine. Oh. But eventually in my teen years, there was a movie coming out called Star Wars, and it looked really dumb, and I wanted nothing to do with it because I was a serious science fiction fan. I must have been kind of a pain in the ass kid. Certainly I was.
Most kids are.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't read comic books, I have to admit. Now that's a terrible thing to admit. But at the time, comic books were were lower class stuff. I read serious science fiction, Heinlein and Asimov and
Sure.
Arthur C. Clarke, all these guys. And so when I heard about this movie coming out called Star Wars, I thought it looked dumb. I saw the first commercials. I thought it looked like a Western in outer space, and I just wasn't interested. Then one day I was in a science fiction bookstore in New York, and I happened upon a program from this movie, Star Wars. And I started leafing through it, and it actually looked kind of interesting. And this had to have been late May or early June of 1977. And I would have been in junior high, I guess, probably 7th grade. I decided I wanted to go see it. And so me and a bunch of friends from school, on the last day of school, we walked down to the nearest movie theater and we went to see the original Star Wars. And it was the first movie I'd ever gone to on my own, without an adult, without my parents or some other responsible person. And I remember being very skeptical as the lights went down, and then it just blew my mind. And I think my life changed that day. Up until then, movies in the 70s had been pretty dark and gritty and serious. It seemed like even the comedies, there were dumb comedies, like, I don't know, Cannonball Run, but it seemed like almost everything had to have a social message, and everything had to be serious and cinematic. And Star Wars was the first movie, at least that I'd ever seen, that was just fun, that you could just have a blast watching.
Yeah.
And realizing that movies could be like that kind of changed my thinking. And when Star Wars came out, George Lucas was almost as much of a star of the promotional materials as Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. And that was the first time I really became aware that there were people who made movies, storytellers behind them, kind of. I'd never really thought about it before, despite that moment when I was a little kid seeing people working on the bridge. It never really clicked in my head. And also at that point, TV was very different from movies. TV was the small screen, and Star Trek being the exception, they told small stories, and it was sort of comfort food at home. The movies were big and grand and extraordinary. And it just blew my mind. That first Star Wars came on the screen, and then the giant Star Destroyer, which just kept on going. Now we're so jaded, but when that ship came across the screen for the first time, it was just the most incredible thing. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. And it right then and there, I think, is where I decided I was going to make movies.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story.
I love that. I feel like anybody who's watched Star Wars has that moment of feeling like, oh, this is going to be so dumb, this is going to be awful, and then like the first note of the theme song hits you and you're like, never mind.
Yeah, right.
I love this.
Yeah.
I'm hooked.
I often wonder if people who see it on a TV screen, even, we have big TVs now, but I wonder if people who see it that way for the first time have the same feeling that we did when we saw it in the theaters.
I don't know.
I wonder. I don't know.
That is an interesting thought, though. Because I can
actually comment on that.
You can.
So my very first experience of watching it was with Return of the Jedi, because I was born in 76.
Okay.
And there was a lot of family upheaval around the time in 81 when when Empire came out. So I never saw Empire in the theater. So I started off with Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. I went back and saw the others on VHS later.
After you'd seen Jedi?
After I had seen Jedi.
That must have been confusing.
I was 8, so it was at that point it was just a story, right?
Right. Right.
So for me, it was still as cool and as captivating to hear the theme music, crank off, and then watch the crawl and like you talked about, you see that ship come in and all these different things. I still had all the emotions that I had of being so excited to see this laser sword movie with what turned out to be knee-high murder bears and all these other things.
They're adorable.
Yeah. And then I had the same reaction in watching A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back because, oh, you mean there's other versions of this story? They're out there. I can watch those too.
Right.
And so to this day, Empire is still my favorite, all-time favorite movie.
So bouncing off the conversation we've already been having, off of Tim's first question, people have a tendency to take their fandoms very, very seriously, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel, DC. Even the My Little Pony fans take their fandom very, very seriously. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for science fiction, action, comedy, horror, disaster films, because those bigger franchises take up so much room. So do you think that there's a real benefit to letting go of the serious side of films and just letting yourself be entertained by the things that most people find absurd? And I'm saying this as a fan of Rocky Horror and Mel Brooks and Monty Python and
right.
Sharknado.
What was that last one? I didn't catch that. I've heard of that. Sure, there's a great benefit to that. I mean, sometimes you need to just disconnect your brain. I mean, a lot of people, have talked to me about that and about how much they enjoy that aspect of it, about not having to think about it. But at the same time, I was contacted once by a woman who, on Twitter, I guess it was, and she told me how much she loved Sharknado. And she told me that it was the first thing she saw after she had a miscarriage that made her laugh.
Oh,
wow.
And I was like, okay. I mean, you hear stories like that and you realize that even when you're doing something this silly, you're still affecting people's lives sometimes. And it's just such a wonderful feeling. That even though so many people will dismiss it, I know that it's done good for some, and that's plenty for me. I mean, I'd love to, have created Star Wars, but I'll take my little piece and I'll be happy with it.
Yeah, I have to say that when Sharknado first came out, I remember some of my friends talking about this Sharknado movie, and I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Like, that sounds so dumb. And they went and saw it and they're like, no, you have to see this. And I'm like, is it as dumb as it sounds? And they're like, well, yes, but that's kind of the point. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I mean, if that's the point, I'm like, I guess. And it definitely has its place in entertainment. It is one of those moments where you can shut your brain off.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful level of camp.
It is.
Yeah. I will never apologize for Sharknado for the silliness of it.
No.
I'm very proud of it.
No, you should be. We have a couple of friends that we were talking to, some other podcasting friends, and we always talk about who we have coming up on interviews and what we're doing and all these different things. And we told one of them, his name is Jason Taylor, he's from the Three Geeks podcast, and he absolutely he loves the entirety of the Sharknado universe, and he's just like, oh my god, that's so cool, you're talking to Thunder Levin.
We have a universe.
Yes. You have a universe.
Wow. I didn't know.
Well, yeah, I think once you get past the trilogy of films, you automatically get a universe. Okay. So yeah, it's the
and to think my agent was telling me to give it up after the third one. I'm glad to know that's the cutoff. Okay.
Yeah, no, you know what? I think there's a whole group of people out there who absolutely love what you're doing, and Jason obviously is one of them. The simple fact that I said that we're interviewing the writer of Sharknado, and he's like, "Oh my god, you're interviewing Thunder Levin?" He knew it, like that. So Jason was very excited to chat, to hear that we were going to be chatting with you, and so I don't think that he's alone in that, because I've talked with a few other people who were just as excited and are excited for this to be able to come out, to hear what your thoughts on things and stuff. So there's a place for everyone.
My husband's coworker is a huge Sharknado fan too, and she's like, let me know when this interview comes out, because I want to hear it.
We might actually get a new subscriber out of that. Woohoo!
Yeah. So welcome new subscribers.
Exactly. So one of the things I loved actually about Sharknado, and I started watching Sharknado 2 again, Which I love the fact that it's called Sharknado 2, the second one. That killed me. I love the subtle humor and the not so subtle humor, some of the things that you did. I absolutely love the silliness, the camp, and everything else. I love that you guys steered into it, and I think that's fantastic.
Well, that was sort of a big part of the discussion, I guess, after the first one, was which way to go with it. Do we steer into this, figuring out what the audience was responding to and making sure that that's what we did.
Sure.
Was an important step, I think.
So, but one of the things I loved, other than that, was also the fact that you pay homage to a lot of different movies. In that, you paid homage to Jaws in the first one, the whole, propane tank in the mouth and explosion. Right. There's in Sharknado 2, there's something on the wing, and I love that. The Twilight Zone. There's James Bond, there's Cloverfield references, there's Avengers references. There's a whole lot of good stuff that you guys pay homage to. So with a film like Sharknado, and we're going to talk about some of your other ones coming up here real quick, but with the films like Sharknado and some of your other ones, what role do homages play in your writing style?
I guess there are two levels to that. In my regular writing, whatever I'm doing, if it takes place in present day reality, I feel like we should acknowledge the world that it takes place in. And in present day reality, Star Wars exists, Jaws exists, Airplane exists. So if you're doing something that reminds you of something in a movie that is well known, it almost would feel artificial to not mention it.
Sure.
So even in my more serious work, the pop culture, as long as it's not too recent, will play into it. The trick, of course, when you reference pop culture, is something that might be big today could disappear tomorrow. And 5 years from now, or even a year from now, when the film comes out, people will just groan, or even worse, not know what you're talking about. So I try and stick to sort of more classic pop culture stuff that you can be confident everybody knows.
Sure, the tried and true.
Yeah, as far as Sharknado goes, that was rather contentious in the first one, is that I had more homages and pop culture references in the script, and the producers made me take them out because they thought it was kitschy. They left the Jaws things alone because we're making a shark movie, and you can't make a shark movie without acknowledging Jaws. But the other stuff was cut. And then in the second one, I got a little bit, we got a lot in there, because that opening scene on the plane where we did the thing, that's baked into it, right? That's Twilight Zone. And once you're on a plane, well, you got to start talking about Airplane. So that sort of gave me the in to be able to do that a little bit more. And then when they saw how the audience reacted to it in the second one, there was no more pushback in the third movie. And when it came time to write the fourth movie, both the producers and the network was like telling me more pop culture references, more movie references, and they were actually giving me ones that they wanted to put in.
Oh, that's cool.
Some of them were a bit too current, and I was like, this is where we could get into trouble. So that becomes a balancing act that we all sort of talked about and worked out about where the line was and how much of this can we put in.
I did appreciate the fact that you guys were working in some of the Airplane movie angles into that in Sharknado 2. Honestly, when Finn started getting worked up in his seat, and I kept waiting to see like a whole line of people just to go smack him and calm down. But
yeah, and you can only go so far.
Right.
Even in Sharknado. Well, not really. But but you only want to take so much from any given thing.
Right. Understood.
And then when we got Robert Hayes to play the pilot,
Yeah, because I sat there honestly and I was going, That's Robert Hayes. Is that Robert Hayes? That is Robert Hayes. Yeah.
And he's flying a plane. Oh my God.
It was a beautiful touch. It really was.
He wasn't the first choice, I have to admit, but when we got him, when Anthony told me that we'd gotten Robert Hayes, I was like, oh my God, that's perfect.
Yeah. So you have already said that you will not apologize for Sharknado, and there's no reason that you should. But addressing the megalodon in the room, that it is. So there is a meme that frequently circulates the internet with the next time you're afraid to share your ideas, remember someone once said in a meeting, let's make a movie about a tornado filled with sharks.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a ridiculous concept. It is a ridiculous concept for a movie.
Why do you say that?
Yeah, it's a little obvious, but it's great. I mean, it
makes perfect sense to me.
So how did Sharknado come about, and how did you present this as a project, as a serious project that should actually be made into a movie? And did you think that it would ever spawn into a series?
Okay. So the great thing about that meme is I was not in that meeting.
It's even better. That does make the meme that much better.
Yeah. So the way it came to me is I had just done a movie for the Asylum. That's a production company that made Sharknado. I had just done a movie for them called American Warships, and everybody at the company was very happy with it. I was pretty happy with it, and so we were talking about, as I was finishing post-production on American Warships, we were talking about what I was going to do for them next. And there were a lot of different things we were talking about. There was a giant monster movie. There was a science fiction thing. And then they said, what we'd really like you to do first is a movie called Sharkstorm. And there was no story. There was no pitch. It was just, it's called Sharkstorm. Do with that what you will. And I was like, I feel like sharks have been played out. And Deep Blue Sea already did Sharks and a Storm.
Yeah.
And it's going to be played seriously because the Asylum always tries to play their movies serious, straight, let's say, not self-aware.
Okay.
And so it just didn't appeal to me. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. Let's talk about some of these other projects. And then like a month later, they came back to me. And they said, and by now I'd already picked a couple of projects that I was going to work on. And they came back to me and they said, okay, forget Sharkstorm. Now it's called Sharknado. And I said, what do sharks have to do with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Because I heard Sharknado. And he said, no, Sharknado, a tornado of sharks. I'm like, okay, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. And if I can play it that way, then I'm in.
Right.
Because the Asylum, in general, they don't like to do a self-aware, intentional camp. And it seemed to me that a movie called Sharknado had to be ridiculous. And they said, yes, we all agree. SciFi wants to do this. We acknowledge it has to be ridiculous. Here are some notes. They had like 3/4 of a page of notes about what it could be about. And go do your thing. And originally it was set in Australia, and the hero's name was Baz. And Nova really didn't exist at all. And so I moved it to LA. I made the hero's name Finn Shepard, because Shepard is a person who takes care of people, and he's going to be our hero and take care of people. I thought I was being, very, very obvious with that, but no one ever mentions it to me.
And Finn because of shark fins.
And Finn because of sharks, of course.
Of course.
And I invented Nova, and she's named after the character in Planet of the Apes. Nova. And basically set about having as much fun with it as I could. And basically the way I approached it was this is a ridiculous concept, but I don't want to be smirking at the camera, right?
Right.
It's important that the characters not know they're in a movie, but it should be clear to the audience that the filmmakers know they're in a movie. The audience needs to be in on the joke, and they need to know that the people who made the movie are in on the joke. The only people who can't be in on it are the characters themselves.
Fair.
And so it was a matter of going into it and saying, okay, if this incredible, ridiculous thing happened to me, what would I do? And that's basically just sort of how I proceeded. I'm a bit of a prepper. I don't like to use the word survivalist, and I don't have some compound hidden away in the woods somewhere, and I don't have a huge cache of weapons and supplies to last me 20 years. But I do try and, think about what I would do in various situations and be as prepared as I can within reason. So I gave those attributes to Finn. Basically, Finn was an idealized version of myself, is the way I approached it. What would I do if I were an action adventure hero and I was put in this situation? And I was going through, still am, but I was going through a difficult separation with my wife. And so for Finn to be going across town to rescue his ex-wife was something that really resonated with me. Nova was basically the kick-ass chick that we all want in a movie like this, but at the same time, she was Quint from Jaws. So if you're going to if you're going to steal Quint from Jaws, put him in your movie, why not have her be the kick-ass hot girl?
Right.
And then in my original conception, April, his wife, was a bit more sympathetic because I was sort of playing out my relationship in the film. And then when Anthony and Tara started creating her, she got a little whinier, I think, a little bitchier than I had originally intended. But it all worked. Anthony certainly knew what he was doing. And the reason he knew what he was doing is that it was all his idea. It turns out what I didn't know at the time was that Anthony Ferrante had written this movie called Leprechaun's Revenge. Although when he wrote it, it was called Red Clover. When it got to SciFi, I think it was called Leprechaun's Revenge. And in this movie, there's a scene where two characters are hiding from the leprechauns who are rampaging. And they're just, it's like a Quentin Tarantino kind of scene. They're just bullshitting while they hide. And and one of the characters says to the other, God, these leprechauns are destroying our town. I hope our town doesn't go the way of Santa Mira, this other town. They never recovered after the Sharknado hit. And someone at SciFi saw that and said, that's the movie we should make. We should make a movie called Sharknado. So SciFi had this title with nothing to go with it. And the Asylum wanted to make this Shark Storm movie that they'd put together, these notes for. And SciFi had, at that point, SciFi was churning out a lot of these B movies every week, basically. And the Asylum had their monthly or quarterly meeting with SciFi, and they said, hey, we want to make this movie called Shark Storm. And the people at SciFi said, that's great, but call it Sharknado. And so that's where it all came from. And then it came back to me, and I had to make sense of that. And there will be those who say that I did not make sense of it, but I would dispute them. I think it's a perfect, step by step, it's all perfectly logical. I've talked to a lot of weather people, meteorologists. I've talked to a lot of shark biologists, and there's nothing they can point to in the first Sharknado that isn't at least theoretically possible. It's not very likely, but it's at least physically possible.
All right. Well, at least it's set in theory, so that's good.
Yes, yes.
And I think, given the absurdity of the movie, which I mean, again, I say this having watched the movie and loving the movie.
No, you're not insulting me by saying Sharknado is absurd.
I think you definitely did it justice with what it is. And having said that the only ones who aren't in on the joke are the characters themselves, sort of thing, like that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like watching it again with that's the writer's intent will actually help a lot of people who might have dismissed it initially with this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, aka me. Like it'll have a new meaning to it. It'll be more of the no. Everybody else knows this is a joke, except for them.
Yeah. Well,
it's all about perspective.
I hope you get to experience it again on a whole new level.
It is currently in my Amazon watch list again.
There you go. All right, so Thunder, a lot of people, we've been talking about Sharknado a lot, and a lot of people know you from your work in Sharknado and being that. But you have an extensive IMDb list that's outside of the Sharknado verse. That's what I'm going to call it, the Sharknado verse. Wow. And I'm going to go back to the fact that you said Sharknado as in NATO, NATO.
And now I was actually starting.
Yeah. Now that
I was trying to figure out how to write that as a movie now too.
That's funny because I was when he first said that to me, instantly the thought flashed through my head of the army battling sharks in Europe. And I saw sharks coming out of the Danube and tanks blasting them and stuff. So I mean, there is a way.
We've had a movie about Nazis on the moon. Why couldn't we have?
That's right.
Sharks with freaking laser people. Anyway,
there is. Well, we got there eventually. I mean, we were talking about that from the time we knew there was going to be a sequel to the first movie. Can we have sharks with freaking laser beams on their head? And it took 3 more movies to actually get it in. But we got there. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, like I said, you've got an extensive list of movies that you've worked on, some of which we listed in the introduction, some of which we didn't. There's, like I said, if you guys want to know what those are, you can check out his IMDb page, and there's a whole bulletized list there. You can see what he did. But out of the works listed on your IMDb page, or maybe one that's not listed yet, is there a project that you think or you would like for people to pay a little bit more attention to, because maybe this is a representation of who and what Thunder Levin is?
Well, I mean, I'm working on several things right now that are as far from Sharknado as you can get. I'm working on a very serious, dark science fiction thriller called Star Child. And that's the thing I really want to make my next directing job. It's it's a hard time to get original movies made, much less original science fiction movies made. Everything has to be a sequel or a prequel or a reboot or an adaptation. So I have not had the success with that I would like, but that's the thing that I really want to do next. At the same time, I'm developing 3 different TV series, 2 of which are based on books, because it does seem like the only way to get anything made is for it to be a pre-existing IP. So so one of them is based on David L. Goleman's book series, The Event Group, which is about an ultra secret branch of the government that has existed basically since the Civil War, and investigates when strange anomalous events occur, and basically exists to make sure that humanity isn't doomed by repeating its past. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. There's a book series by Rebecca Cantrell called the Joe Tesla series. It's about this guy who's a descendant of Nikola Tesla, who is suddenly struck with agoraphobia and ends up having to live in a house beneath Grand Central Terminal in New York, and about his efforts to figure out what happened to him. And at the same time, each season he gets involved in different adventures, and he lives almost entirely underground. And then I have an original series, which was inspired by something that is very Sharknado-esque, but I actually took it in a different direction. A few years back, a police department in Tennessee put out a public service announcement or a press release or something, asking people to please stop flushing their methamphetamine down the toilet because it could get into the river system and cause meth gators, and nobody wants that.
Not the meth gators.
And so suddenly overnight, everybody on Twitter was telling me that meth gators had to be my next project.
Oh yeah.
And it just seemed so obvious for the Sharknado guy. I didn't want to do that, you know. And so I sat on it for a while, and I thought, and after a while I thought, is there something else I can do with this idea? And so I actually came up with this quirky small town mystery about a New York cop who's just retired. He's completely burned out, and he goes back to his small backwater hometown that's called Hurricane, Alabama, where he grew up and where he has these idealized memories of life on the bayou. And he goes back thinking it's going to be sort of a semi-retirement, and it's about how he's changed by living in New York for 20 years, coming back to his small southern Alabama rural town, and thinking he's going to instantly fit in, you know, having dreamed of going home for all these years. And then he finds that home has changed, and of course he has changed. And it's all about this idea of, can we go home again? And one of the things he discovers is that meth has become a real problem in the area. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that because, you know, he was dealing with drugs in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And what's worse is there's a new drug on the street. And at the same time, pets are disappearing, and some meth addicts have disappeared. And then finally the daughter of local one percenters, who's the prom queen and cheerleader, she disappears, and he finds her empty car in his precinct. And so he's now forced to investigate. And it turns out that this new drug has leaked into the ecosystem and has sort of supercharged the alligators in the swamp. And that is sort of something that plays in the background to this character drama. That's, you know, it's sort of Ozark meets True Detective with just a splash of Lake Placid in there. And that's something else I'm about to take out and try and sell, and we'll see if we get anywhere with it.
Sounds cool.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's different enough for me, but at the same time, there's still that element that people will say, okay, maybe the Sharknado guy can do this.
Right.
And so it'll be a way for me to segue into more serious things. At the same time, I'm also pitching a movie called Deadbeard, the zombie pirate musical, which would seem like a logical follow-up to Sharknado.
I would watch that. That sounds fantastic.
Everybody I talk to says they would love to see that. The only people who don't want to see it are the people who pay for movies. And I haven't quite figured out how to bridge that yet. The only people who don't want to see this movie are people that actually make movies. So I'm working on that. As far as the movies I've made, there are two that I'm pretty proud of that are not Sharknado-esque. There's American Warships and AE Apocalypse Earth. When I made AE, it was just called AE. The Asylum decided to add Apocalypse Earth to the title to jazz it up. I liked the idea of it being kind of an unknown mystery. What does AE stand for? People will go to see it to figure out what it's about.
Right.
And when people asked me what AE stood for, I said almost everything. And it's a little science fiction movie about these people on a Earth has been destroyed, and it's these people who escaped from Earth and are going to a planet, but their ship is damaged and they crash on this hostile world. And it's about how this small group of people who don't know each other have to come together to survive.
Ooh.
And it stars Adrian Paul from the Highlander TV series,
Mhm.
and Richard Grieco from the original 21 Jump
Sure,
Street.
sure.
Um, and a Costa Rican supermodel named Bally Rodriguez, who plays a humanoid character who has naturally camouflaged skin. And she actually had to spend like 8 hours in makeup the first day of each week. And then she lived in this varying shades of green body paint for a week while we shot. And then she got to wash it off uh, for each of our weekends. And then American Warships is the movie that Battleship should have been and wasn't, if you ask me.
Okay.
The Asylum wanted to do a movie that would ride Battleship's coattails. And they asked me to make a movie that could be called Battleships. And then eventually we expanded the title to American Warships. But it's basically an old-fashioned naval war movie about the last American battleship, which is on its way to be turned into a museum, which ends up being the only ship that can save the world when this mysterious stealth cloaked ship starts trying to start a war between the U.S. and China. And it has this EMP weapon that renders all sort of advanced technology that destroys anything based on microchips. It blows them up, basically. And so this World War II battleship, the USS Iowa, with its old-fashioned analog equipment and big guns, is the only ship in a position to save the world. So it's got elements of Battlestar Galactica. It's got elements of a Star Trek episode called Balance of Terror, because they're hunting this invisible ship. And then it turns out that it has aliens too. And the only thing about that movie that disappoints me really is the special effects of the aliens, because I did not like the creature design. It looked, to me, the creature design ended up being very campy. And the thing about Asylum movies is you're making them very fast for very little money. And even though we got to shoot on a real battleship, which gave us a lot of production value, once the aliens were created, it was almost too late for me to say, no, that's not what they should look like, because they didn't have the time to remake them. So I feel like sometimes that movie, people think it's campier than it really is because the aliens look so weird. But other than that, I'm really proud of that movie. Everything we shot on the ship, I'm really proud of. And I think it's sort of a throwback to movies that I would see on daytime TV when I was a kid, that had been made like in the 50s. And it was the only stuff, that before the internet, before streaming, local TV channels would show old movies during the day because they were very cheap for them to air. And there were all these World War II naval battle movies that I grew up on, and looking back on it now, the effects of those movies were even cheesier than what we did, because it was models on a tank of water,
right?
Little destroyer and battleship models and stuff. But I grew up on that, and so getting a chance to make that kind of a movie was really special for me.
Yeah,
very cool.
So talking about being successful, and as a successful writer and director and sometimes even actor, you can look back on what you've accomplished, and looking back at what you've accomplished, what is the best piece of advice that you would give to someone trying to get started in the entertainment industry? That bit of wisdom that you wish that you had starting out?
Well, there are two bits of wisdom that I try to impart when I go to talk to film classes. The first is to say, if there's anything else you can do for a living that will nourish your soul, that will make you happy, go do that. Because this business will chew you up and spit you out, and it'll break your heart 99 times out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
So unless this is the only thing you can imagine yourself doing that will make you happy, don't do it. If you're one of those people who can't imagine doing anything else, my only other real piece of advice is never give up. Because you will be told you're no good. You will be rejected over and over and over again. And when your job is basically telling your dreams to the world, and people are telling you you're no good, that means they're telling you your dreams are no good, and your dreams are usually an intimate distillation of yourself.
Yeah.
So rejection as a writer, whether it's movies or novels or whatever, rejection as a writer is a particularly personal kind of rejection. If you're a computer programmer and you come up with this great app, and someone says, no, it's too buggy. Well, okay. The idea, it was still a good idea. And you're not going to take that personally. It's just a matter of your craft, right?
Right.
But when something is this personal, or an accountant makes a mistake, well, I mean, you're gonna take it personally, but only because you made a mistake.
Right.
It's not because your very personhood is being questioned. But for a writer, it can feel that way. It can feel like your very legitimacy of who you are is being rejected. And so if you can get through that and never give up, eventually, hopefully, you will achieve something. I mean, I was in this business for 20 years before Sharknado, and no one had ever heard of me. And I spent years trying to get people to take me seriously as a director because of my short films, and the scripts I wrote. And I spent years trying to get scripts sold or produced, and I'd get close. I'd get producers optioned a lot of my scripts, but they never got made. They never got sold. And a saner person would have given up. But I kept going. And eventually I decided to raise money and make my own film. And that was Mutant Vampire Zombies from the Hood. And it was because of that I got my first writing job at the Asylum. And it was at least partly because of that, I assume, that when Sharknado came up, the Asylum thought I was the guy to do it. Because I had made this tongue-in-cheek disaster film already. So they figured I knew I knew how to do that and walk that line between pure parody and serious disaster movie. Because I think that's really what made Sharknado work, was sort of walking that fine line.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, those are the two pieces of advice. A, don't do it. And if you're going to do it, never give up.
Be determined. Sure.
I think those are solid pieces of advice, though.
If you're determined to do it, at least, fight for it.
Right.
Don't give up.
And I like that if there's something else that'll make you happy, go do that. Like that.
Yeah. And you can always write on your own. People write for themselves all the time. I've just joined this sort of educational / networking website where I'm going to be mentoring and providing feedback for new writers. And one of the writers that I just read his script a couple of days ago and was talking to him yesterday, giving him feedback on his script. And I said, how many scripts have you written? He was like, well, 15. 15. I thought he was a new writer. How long have you been doing this? About 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, okay. And he wasn't even concerned with, how do I get this sold? He was writing for himself. He just, how do I be a better writer? He wasn't asking me for advice on selling his script. He was asking me for advice on how to make his script better because he wanted to be a better writer. He had another job. He had a whole career. He had, he made a good living. He did this for himself. So if you can do that too, there used to be a lot of unpublished novels. Now that you can self-publish to Amazon and it's not looked down on and it's not as expensive as it once was before digital publishing, there were a lot of unpublished novels.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Now you can, if you want to write a novel, if you have some other way to make a living, you can write your novel, you can put it out there, and maybe it'll connect with some people.
Yeah,
even
right.
if no publisher ever wanted it, you could still find an audience. Maybe it won't be huge. Maybe it won't be enough people buying your book for you to live on what your books are bringing in. But it's still a book that some people have read, and maybe someone will say, this is the first thing I read after I had a miscarriage and it really made me feel better. And that makes it worth it right there. Yeah.
That's the win. All right, Thunder, we have one final question for you. And we call it.
I know I talked and talked, and you probably had 10 questions you haven't asked, but
no, actually you
okay.
We only had a couple more, and honestly, you answered them as we were going, so we saw no reason to re-ask. So
okay.
No, and that's fine. Perfectly well done. So here it is. So this is our silly question. You can answer this as legit or as silly as you would like to be, or you can decide to walk that fine line.
Okay. I need several drafts to walk the fine line. So
well, we'll see how you do with it.
Okay.
All right. If you had a time machine, where in the stream of time are you going and why?
Okay, the serious answer. I forget what year it was, 1990, 1993. I would go to Massachusetts and I would tell JFK Jr. not to get in that plane.
Okay.
I would love to go back to I don't know. There's so many things. I guess if I had a time machine, what I would really want to do is I'd want to go back to the age of the dinosaurs and just see real live dinosaurs. That would be the thing that would make me happiest, I guess.
As long as you don't need a returning power source, I think you're good to go.
Yeah, yeah. And if I could go forward into the future, I would love to get to this, assuming we don't blow ourselves up or destroy the environment and go extinct, because of that, which seems more likely every day. But if we eventually get to that Star Trek future where we can travel faster than light and we can explore the cosmos, that's really what I'd like to do the most.
All right, fair enough.
So I would go forward and I would explore.
Okay.
I like that. So if you did go backward and you got to the age of the dinosaurs, which dinosaur would you be the most excited to see? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just old school, as I love the T-Rex.
See, there's nothing wrong with that. But
it's just such an obvious answer. I feel so plebeian saying.
Oh, it's okay though. I just struggle. I struggle with the fact that that's such a cool question to ask when you're a kid, but when you're an adult, nobody cares what your favorite dinosaur is anymore. And it's really sad.
It is. Why don't we ask more people that? You know what? I'm gonna make that a resolution. From now on, when I meet somebody new, I'm gonna ask them what their favorite dinosaur is.
Because then you can show off your cool Parasaurolophus that you just have sitting on your desk.
Yes.
Because I love them. See?
Yes.
It's a fun question.
And what about Pachycephalosaurus, who had this giant crown of bone that he could smash his head into?
Yes. They're so much fun. My daughter's favorite is the Ankylosaurus because she likes their hands.
Yes. I like all of them.
They're just fun.
I was a big dinosaur fan when I was a kid. And I like all of them. I like the Ankylosaurus. I like the Stegosaurus. I like all the Diplodocus and the the brachiosaurs. I like all of them. And the one you just showed up, there were two like that. There's that one, and there's one with a different kind of horn, and they thought they stored air in their horns to allow them to breathe underwater.
Yeah, these are the ones that trumpeted to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
But I know about I remember the
and
other
pteranodons. I love pteranodons.
Tim, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
Well, I too am boring. I've always thought the T-Rex was cool. Because of that and Meet the Robinsons, so I could walk around saying
little arms. Yeah.
But yeah, no, honestly, I just like being able to say that. But yeah, T-Rex and probably I always kind of, when I was a kid, I liked the Triceratops because it was a triple rhino, and I thought rhinos were cool because in my mind they were modern day dinosaurs.
They really are.
And that's how I saw them. And so I was like, oh well, it used to have 3 horns, now it has 1 horn, and from being here it moved down to here. So it's just in my head, that's how I saw it. But so yeah, so I've always thought that T-Rexes were cool just because they were just so gosh darn violent, and everybody was afraid of them. And I always thought that the Triceratops were cool because that was like the in my opinion, as a young person and who knew next to nothing about dinosaurs, that was like the one thing that could defeat the T-Rex, because it could get underneath it and hit its underside of its belly and with its horns. And I always thought that was cool. So those were my 2.
Yep.
So Thunder, we have enjoyed our conversation so much with you today. Can you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can go to find out more about your work and where they can keep an eye on what you've got coming? Because you've got more things coming.
I have lots of things coming, I hope. Twitter just took away my blue check yesterday.
Oh, rude.
That darn Elon. But you can still find me there. I haven't given up on it entirely. So it's just at Thunder Levin. And on Facebook, facebook.com/Thunder Levin official.
Perfect.
We will definitely link both of those so that our viewers and our listeners can follow you, because you've got more stuff.
I would love to have them. And if any writers out there would like to pick my brain, I am available for consultations on stage32.com. That's my latest thing is I'm working.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
We'll see how that goes.
We'll include that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, guys, we want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to help us continue to grow and to get amazing guests like Thunder Levin here today to have this fantastic conversation with. We've really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot of great funny moments for you guys to listen to in this week's episode. So please subscribe. It helps out more than we can ever really tell. And make sure that you check out Thunder's work as well. But as always, if you are not happy with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the complaint department. And that, of course, is Finn and his chainsaw from Sharknado. Finn is just waiting to fix the wrongs that we make and make them right. He and his chainsaw, his shark cutting chainsaw, mind you, will be ready to saw your complaints in half and hopefully just be used to scare the daylights out of our bad podcasting skills. So send in 3 copies of your complaints, because those darn chainsaws get a little hungry from time to time. You never know when they're going to go through a complaint form kind of quickly. But rest assured, your complaints will not be overlooked, but they are just one pull of Finn's chainsaw away from being resolved.
I'm going to protect myself with my bar stool. They can't get me. I didn't do it this time.
Don't pick on my seat.
Thunder, thank you again for being on our show. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, that's going to conclude us for the FSF PopCast. Goodbye. On behalf of the rest of the hosts of the FSF PopCast, we want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, please contact us by means of Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FSF PopCast, or go to www.fsfpopcast.com and click on the Contact Me link. Thanks again, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
Copyright 2023 FSF PopCast.
Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF PopCast. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpopcast.com. Original music by Jordan Michaels.